Have you ever thought about why the US dollar is the world's reserve currency? America is the global superpower, so that must be why the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, right? Maybe the better answer is the decline of the European economy during major conflicts in the 20th century. Sure. But what if I told you there's a simpler answer? We lied.
The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world.
Throughout thousands of years of history, there's been lots of things that have been used as a medium of exchange. So we've had feathers, rocks, seashells, gold became that. 5,000 years it was gold. So that's how money works. So what happened is in order to get money settlement to move faster, we went to a ledger. Somebody controls the ledger and says, off of Marks, on to Nicole's. Okay? So what happens is those dollars are debt instruments, meaning that that dollar is representative of the gold that somebody's holding for me. It's an IOU, right? So at some point I could take 20 of those IOU claims and go get the gold if I wanted, but I don't really need to. And so dollars are debt. You follow me so far?
Okay, yeah, I'm following you.
The problem is who controls the ledger that introduces what we call counterparty risk? Do they really have the gold? Can I trust them to not take more gold off my account and not give it to you? Can I trust them to give it to you when I want them to? Can I trust them not to say they have more gold than they actually do?
Gold has been a symbol of wealth and stability for centuries. Its inherent value and universal acceptance made it an ideal medium for trade and a reliable store of value. The US formally adopted the gold standard in 1879, establishing the dollar's value in terms of a specific amount of gold. This system ensured that the US currency was directly tied to gold reserves, creating confidence in the dollar's stability. Under the gold standard, each dollar issued by the government was backed by a corresponding amount of gold held in reserve. This linkage provided a sense of security and predictability in the currency's value. However, it also imposed constraints on the government's ability to expand the money supply, as the amount of currency in circulation was limited by the gold reserves. The Great Depression of the 1930s highlighted the limitations of the gold standard. As economic conditions worsened, countries around the world faced deflationary pressures and were unable to effectively respond to the crisis due to the rigidity of the gold standard. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt took the decisive step of abandoning the gold standard domestically, allowing the government more flexibility to increase the money supply and stimulate the economy. One of the most controversial steps taken during this period was Executive Order 6102, signed by President Roosevelt on April 5, 1933. This order required all Americans to surrender their gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve by May 1, 1933, in exchange for paper currency at the then current rate of $20.67 per ounce.
Article 6102, they declared a bank holiday. All the banks shut down for a week. No one could get their money out of the bank. When the banks open back up, gold's illegal. You're not allowed to own it, and you can't get your gold out of the bank. Don't worry, though. We're going to give you your $20 per ounce. Here you go. These debt instruments. We're going to give them to you, but they're not redeemable for gold anymore. And, oh, by the way, it's not $20 per ounce anymore. Now it's $35 per ounce. So you just lost 60% of your wealth instantly.
Essentially, the government robbed its citizens in broad daylight. But since the world was going through the Great Depression, it was applauded, and President Roosevelt was looked at as a hero for stabilizing the banks and economy. And as America recovered from the Great Depression, the world was headed to an even darker place: World War II. You see, when you think of war in the movies and TV shows, they often show the death toll, historical figures, and brutal ramifications. What we often miss is the economic conflicts that happen across the world, and more specifically, the debt that is accumulated. In the aftermath of World War II, the global economy required a stable and reliable system to facilitate reconstruction and international trade. The Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 established a new international monetary system, where the US dollar was pegged to gold, and other currencies were pegged to the dollar. This arrangement was largely due to the economic dominance of the United States, which held the largest gold reserves in the world at the time, mainly due to the war. Countries agreed to the Bretton Woods system for several reasons. Economic stability. The dollar, backed by gold, offered stability in the war-torn global economy. Trade facilitation. The U.S. was the largest economy, and a dollar-based system simplified trade and financial transactions. Political influence. The U.S. exerted significant influence over the negotiations, leveraging its economic and political clout. This system effectively made the U.S. dollar the world's primary reserve currency. Other nations accumulated dollars through trade surpluses, which they could theoretically convert to gold at the fixed rate of $35 per ounce. 44 nations traveled to New Hampshire and agreed to this. I repeat, 44 nations essentially gave the United States their trust to back their currency with the dollar. When you look back on this agreement, it's astonishing. But what happens next is even more so. In the 1960s, as the U.S. continued to run large trade deficits and finance the Vietnam War and domestic programs through increased money supply, confidence in the U.S. dollar's convertibility into gold began to wane. Cracks began to appear in the Bretton Woods system. Several key factors contributed to this erosion. Persistent U.S. trade deficits meant other countries accumulated more dollars than the U.S. had gold reserves. As doubts grew about the dollar's convertibility, speculators began to demand gold for their dollars, depleting U.S. gold reserves. The U.S. increased money supply to finance its deficits, leading to inflation and further undermining confidence in the dollar's value. France, under President Charles de Gaulle, was particularly vocal about the imbalances and vulnerabilities of the Bretton Woods system. De Gaulle criticized the system, which he saw as giving the U.S. an unfair advantage, often referred to as the exorbitant privilege of issuing the world's reserve currency. In 1965, de Gaulle took a bold step by sending the French Navy to New York to convert its dollar holdings into gold. De Gaulle and his finance minister recognized that the growing disparity between the U.S. dollar supply and gold reserves made the Bretton Woods system unsustainable. By converting dollars into gold, France sought to assert its economic independence and reduce its reliance on the U.S. dollar. This move was also intended to signal to other countries the inherent instability of the current monetary system and possibly prompt broader changes. France's actions set off a ripple effect. Other countries began to follow suit, redeeming their dollars for gold, thereby exacerbating the depletion of U.S. gold reserves. This led to a crisis of confidence in the dollar and heightened the pressure on the U.S. to address the mounting economic challenges. President Richard Nixon took a decisive step on August 15, 1971. In a televised address, Nixon announced the suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold, effectively ending the Bretton Woods system.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets. The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar.
This move, known as the Nixon Shock, was intended to stabilize the U.S. economy and protect the gold reserves. This basically pulled the rug up under the world, and it was no going back.
But the U.S. lied. The whole time they printed too many dollars, and when that severed, not did just the dollar get disconnected from gold, all currencies did. So we're 52 years, or now 53 years into this fiat money experiment that the world has never seen before.
All because the agreement the United States broke. By then, the world was too intertwined in global trade, and despite the end of the Bretton Woods system, the US dollar maintained its status as the world's primary reserve currency due to the size and strength of the US economy, its deep financial markets, and geopolitical influence. The new system facilitated greater financial integration and capital flows, but also introduced new risks and vulnerabilities, as seen in subsequent financial crises. This put us on a new timeline, a new multiverse of global trade. The age of fiat currency was upon us, and now we're here.
The Federal Reserve. That's independence within the government, not independence of the government.
Well, we knew that the key was Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had more oil than anybody else in the world. And we knew that the House of Saud, the royal family, was corrupted and corruptible.
They're calling it the Monday Massacre, the worst drop in Wall Street history.
It's described as nothing short of breathtaking, a points drop never before seen on the US markets.
Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate.
So our wealth gap is now the largest since the 1930s.
Make a long story short, comes the end of the 20th century, these corporations realized that they could make much more profits, basically by leaving the United States, Europe, and Japan, and moving to India, China, Brazil, and a whole host of other countries to take advantage of the enormous difference, above all, in wage rates.
And guess what? Bidenomics is working.